The ballroom fell silent the moment his hand touched hers. Eliza Whitmore, plain, invisible, nobody, stood frozen as the Duke of Blackthorn led her onto the floor. Every eye in Hampshire turned toward them, not with admiration, but with venom. Whispers cut through the air like knives. Why her? What game is he playing? Her sisters stood pale with shock. Her mother's face twisted in confusion and rage. And Eliza? She wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor and cease to exist. Because in a world that had spent 22 years reminding her she didn't matter, this attention felt like the cruelest joke of all. Before we begin, I want to invite you to stay with me until the very end of this story. If it moves you, please hit that like button and leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The first rule Eliza Whitmore learned was simple. Don't expect to be seen. She learned it at 6, when her mother stopped brushing her hair with the same care she gave her sisters. She learned it at 10, when guests arrived and her father introduced Caroline and Marianne with pride, then glanced past her as though she were part of the furniture. She learned it at 15, when the dressmaker sighed and said, "Well, we'll do what we can," before turning back to Marianne's gown with genuine enthusiasm. By 22, the lesson had carved itself so deeply into her bones that she no longer questioned it. She simply existed in the spaces others didn't notice. The corner of the drawing room, the end of the dinner table, the last carriage during outings to town. Tonight was no different. The assembly ball at Hartfield Manor blazed with candlelight and ambition. Every eligible woman in Hampshire had arrived in silk and desperation, their mothers circling like well-dressed hawks. The season was ending. Opportunities were narrowing. Tonight mattered. Eliza stood against the wall near a marble column, her dress a muted sage green that her mother had declared practical, which meant, "We're not wasting good fabric on you." Caroline floated past in cream silk, her golden curls swept into an artful arrangement that had taken their maid 2 hours to perfect. Men turned to watch her. They always did. Marianne followed in pale pink, her laugh musical and calculated, designed to carry just far enough to seem charming without appearing vulgar. She'd practiced it for weeks. And then there was Eliza, brown hair pulled into a simple knot, a face her aunt once described as pleasant enough if one looks closely, a figure neither generous nor slight, simply unremarkable. She'd stopped trying to compete years ago. There was no point. "You could at least try to look approachable," her mother had hissed in the carriage. "Stand up straight. Smile." Good heavens, Eliza, must you always appear so resigned? But what was the alternative? Pretend that men looked at her the way they looked at her sisters? Pretend she didn't hear the whispers, see the dismissive glances, feel the weight of being the daughter no one wanted to claim? She'd grown skilled at making herself useful instead. She fetched her sister's shawls. She remembered names her mother forgot. She made polite conversation with elderly aunts while Caroline and Marianne danced. It wasn't happiness, but it was survival. "Miss Whitmore." Eliza turned to find Mrs. Pemberton, a formidable woman in purple taffeta who'd known her since childhood. Her expression held the particular kind of pity reserved for hopeless cases. "Still here, I see," Mrs. Pemberton said, her smile tight. "Not dancing?" "I'm quite content to observe, Mrs. Pemberton." "Of course you are." The woman's eyes drifted toward Caroline, who was currently captivating Lord Ashford with some story involving a lost kitten. "Your sister is looking well tonight. Such a shame about the Cheltenham engagement falling through, but I'm sure she'll land someone suitable before the season ends." Unlike you, the unspoken words hung between them. "I'm sure she will," Eliza said evenly. Mrs. Pemberton patted her arm with the same energy one might use to comfort a dying plant. "Well, enjoy the evening, dear." Eliza watched her retreat toward a cluster of matrons, already whispering. She didn't need to hear the words to know the content. Poor girl, such a difficult position, between two beauties and so very plain. She'd learned not to let it sting, mostly. The music shifted, a waltz. Couples swept onto the floor in a blur of silk and practiced elegance. Eliza recognized most of them, the Ashford twins with their respective partners, Miss Hartley with young Mr. Davison, whose father owned half of Sussex, Caroline with Lord Thornbury, who was old enough to be their father, but wealthy enough that their mother had deemed him distinguished. Eliza turned away. She'd perfected the art of looking occupied while doing nothing, examining the wallpaper, adjusting her gloves, studying the paintings as though they held secrets. Anything to avoid the exposure of standing completely still, completely alone, completely unwanted. "They say he's finally arrived." The whisper came from two young women nearby, their fans fluttering with barely contained excitement. "Who?" the second asked. "The Duke. Blackthorn." Eliza's attention sharpened despite herself. Everyone knew the name. Adrian Blackthorn, 5th Duke of Blackthorn, had spent the last 3 years abroad. Before that, he'd been a ghost in society, attending the bare minimum of events, speaking to almost no one, building a reputation as cold, distant, and utterly disinterested in the marriage market. He was also obscenely wealthy and unmarried, which meant every mother in England had spent years trying to crack the ice around him. "I heard he's impossible," the first woman continued. "Refused to dance with Lady Catherine last season, and you know how her mother took that. Maybe he'll be different now. 3 years is a long time. Men like that don't change. They just get colder." Eliza found herself scanning the crowd, curiosity getting the better of her. She'd never seen the Duke. He'd left England before her first season, and by all accounts he'd made no impression during his brief appearances before that. Then the room shifted. It was subtle at first, a change in the energy, a turning of heads toward the entrance. The conversations didn't stop, but they hushed, grew more deliberate. The musicians continued playing, but somehow the music felt quieter. And then Eliza saw him, tall, dark hair, features sharp enough to cut glass. He wore black evening dress that fit like it had been engineered specifically for his frame, and he moved through the crowd with the kind of contained power that made people step aside without realizing they were doing it. This was a man who'd never had to ask for space. The world simply gave it to him. "Your Grace," Lord Hartfield materialized beside him, bowing deeply. "What an honor. We didn't expect—" "I was in the area," the Duke said. His voice was low, controlled, carrying no warmth whatsoever. "I thought I'd make an appearance." Of course. May I introduce—" But the Duke was already moving, his gaze sweeping across the ballroom with the efficiency of someone cataloging assets. His eyes passed over Caroline without pausing, skipped Marianne entirely, and continued their systematic scan. Eliza felt a small, petty satisfaction at that. At least her sisters weren't the only ones he found unremarkable. Then his eyes found hers, and stopped. Eliza's breath caught. She told herself she was imagining it. Men didn't look at her like that, with focus, with intention. Their eyes slid past her the way water moved around a stone. But the Duke of Blackthorn was staring directly at her, and he wasn't looking away. A muscle in his jaw tightened. His expression didn't change. It remained as cold and unreadable as before. But something in his posture shifted. Recognition? No, that was impossible. They'd never met. Eliza dropped her gaze first, her heart hammering. She must have been mistaken. He was probably looking at someone behind her. Lady Whitfield was standing near the refreshment table. Or perhaps footsteps. Deliberate. Coming closer. She forced herself to look up. The Duke of Blackthorn stood 3 feet away, his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. The conversations around them faltered, died. Within seconds, a silence spread through the immediate area like frost across glass. "Miss Whitmore," he said. Her name. He knew her name. "Your Grace." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Years of being overlooked had at least taught her how to hide panic. "I'm surprised you know who I am." "Why would that surprise you?" "Because no one knows who I am," she thought. "Because I've spent my entire life being invisible." "We've never been introduced," she said instead. "No," he agreed. "We haven't." He extended his hand. "Dance with me." The words hit the room like a gunshot. Eliza heard her mother's sharp inhale from somewhere across the ballroom, felt the weight of every eye turning toward them, saw Caroline's face go pale, then red, then something close to purple. This wasn't a request. It was a command wrapped in social convention. And refusing a duke, especially this duke, would be social suicide not just for her but for her entire family. But accepting felt equally dangerous. This was a game she didn't understand, a trap she couldn't see, and every instinct screamed at her to run. I'm not much of a dancer, she said quietly. Neither am I. His hand remained extended. We'll manage. The silence had spread to encompass the entire ballroom now. Even the musicians had stopped, waiting. Everyone was waiting, watching, judging. Eliza placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm, strong, absolutely certain. He led her onto the floor, and the crowd parted like he was Moses and they were the Red Sea. The whispers started immediately, a poisonous hiss that followed them with every step. Why her? What could he possibly... She's nobody. Absolutely nobody. A joke. It must be a joke. The musicians, after a frantic glance from Lord Hartfield, launched into a waltz. The Duke placed his other hand at her waist, and Eliza fought the urge to flinch. She'd danced before. Awkward, obligatory dances with friends of her father, men who'd been strong-armed into asking the plain daughter out of politeness. This felt nothing like those painful exercises in charity. This felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. You're afraid, the Duke observed. Not a question. A statement. I'm confused, Eliza corrected. You don't know me. You've just returned to England, and yet you cross an entire ballroom to dance with arguably the most unremarkable woman here. Forgive me if I find that suspicious. His lips didn't quite smile, but something shifted in his expression. Unremarkable. Is that what you think you are? It's what everyone thinks I am. Everyone is wrong. They moved into the waltz, and despite her claim of being a poor dancer, Eliza found her body responding to his lead automatically. He was skilled, of course he was. Men like him were trained from birth in every social grace, even if they chose to ignore most of them. This is a game, Eliza said quietly, her eyes fixed on his cravat rather than his face. I don't know the rules, and I don't know what you want, but I know this isn't real. Why? Because men like you don't dance with women like me, not unless there's a reason. A wager, perhaps, or a joke, or some political maneuvering I'm too stupid to understand. You're not stupid. Then I'm a prop, a way to make a point, or cause a scene, or reject someone more important by choosing someone worthless instead. Her voice remained steady, factual. She'd had years to think about her value in society's eyes. So which is it, Your Grace? What's the game? The Duke's hand tightened slightly at her waist. When he spoke, his voice was low enough that only she could hear. No game, no wager, no joke. Then what? Recognition. Eliza finally looked up at him. His face was still cold, still controlled, but his eyes... There was something in his eyes that looked almost like pain. I don't understand, she whispered. I know. They completed another rotation, and Eliza became aware of the whispers growing louder, more vicious. She could see her mother's face now, white with shock, and something that looked horribly like shame. Caroline had stopped dancing entirely, standing frozen at the edge of the floor. Marianne was whispering furiously to Miss Hartley, both of them staring. They hate this, Eliza said. They hate me right now. They hated you before. The bluntness of it struck her like a slap, not because it was cruel, because it was true. At least before I was invisible, she said. Now I'm a spectacle. Better to be seen and hated than forgotten. Is it? Eliza met his eyes directly. Is it really? Because from where I'm standing, Your Grace, this attention feels like being held underwater, everyone watching while I drown. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe. Or recognition of a feeling he understood too well. I won't let you drown, he said quietly. Why would you care if I did? The music swelled toward its conclusion. Around them, other couples had resumed dancing, but Eliza could feel their stares like brands against her skin. The Duke guided her through the final steps with the same quiet competence he'd shown throughout, and when the music finally stopped, he didn't immediately release her. Because you saved me once, he said, and I don't forget debts. Before Eliza could respond, he stepped back and bowed, a formal, perfect gesture that somehow felt more intimate than the dance itself. Then he turned and walked away, cutting through the crowd with the same indifferent authority he'd shown entering. Eliza stood alone on the dance floor, every eye in Hampshire burning into her. The The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the whispers exploded. Did you see? Absolutely shameless. Her? Of all people. Must be some kind of mistake. Eliza forced her legs to move, carrying her off the floor toward the nearest exit. She didn't run. That would give them too much satisfaction. But she walked quickly, keeping her spine straight and her face blank. Eliza! Her mother's voice sharp with fury. Eliza kept walking. She made it to the terrace before her mother caught her, fingers digging into her arm hard enough to bruise. What, her mother hissed, was that? A dance. Don't be clever with me. The Duke of Blackthorn doesn't dance with nobodies. He certainly doesn't single them out in front of all of Hampshire. What did you do? Nothing. I was standing against the wall, and he asked me to dance. Liar. The word hit harder than Eliza expected. She pulled her arm free, something hot and dangerous rising in her chest. I'm not lying. Then you must have done something, thrown yourself at him somehow, made a scene, because there is no universe in which a man like that chooses you over your sisters without reason. There it was. The truth her mother had been dancing around for 22 years, finally spoken aloud. You're not good enough. You've never been good enough, and you never will be. I didn't do anything, Eliza repeated, her voice hollow. But you're right, there must be a reason. There's always a reason when someone notices me, isn't there? Because the idea that I might actually be worth noticing is just too absurd to consider. Her mother's face twisted. This isn't about your feelings, Eliza. This is about our family's reputation. The entire room is talking about you, about us. Lord Ashford looked positively disturbed. And Caroline, she pressed her fingers to her temples. Do you have any idea what you've done to your sister's prospects? I danced with a duke who asked me to dance. That's what I did. Don't be deliberately obtuse. This will follow us. People will assume things. They'll think you've trapped him somehow, or that there's some scandal we're hiding. And when nothing comes of it, because nothing will, we'll all look like desperate fools. Then I apologize, Eliza said flatly. Next time a duke asks me to dance, I'll refuse. That will certainly improve our reputation. This isn't funny. No, Eliza agreed. It really isn't. She walked away before her mother could stop her again, moving deeper into the garden where the lights from the ballroom barely reached. Her hands were shaking, her chest felt tight, and underneath the shock and confusion and growing anger, a small, traitorous part of her kept repeating the Duke's words. You saved me once. When? How? She'd never even seen him before tonight. Had she? Eliza closed her eyes, trying to remember. But her past was a blur of being overlooked, being forgotten, being nothing. If she'd saved someone, if she'd made any kind of impact on another human being, surely she would remember. Unless she'd been so invisible even to herself that she'd stopped noticing when she mattered. The sound of footsteps made her turn. She expected her mother, or perhaps one of her sisters, come to deliver another lecture. Instead, she found Caroline. Her sister stood at the edge of the garden path, still in her cream silk, still perfectly arranged. But her face was twisted into something ugly, something Eliza had never quite seen before. What did you do? Caroline asked. Her voice shook. What did you promise him? Nothing. I don't even know him. Liar. The same word their mother had used, but coming from Caroline, it carried more weight, more history, more pain. You've always been jealous. Always watching while Marianne and I got the attention, the proposals, the life you wanted. And now you've found some way to humiliate us, to make us look like fools while you play the victim. Eliza stared at her sister. They'd never been close. How could they be when Caroline existed in sunlight and Eliza in shadow? But she'd never thought Caroline hated her, resented her maybe, found her inconvenient. But not this raw, bitter hatred. I didn't do anything, Eliza said again, but the words felt useless. No one wanted to hear them. You're pathetic, Caroline spat, standing there pretending you don't know what you've done, pretending you're some innocent victim when you've probably been plotting this for months. Did you write him letters, send him your portrait, promise him something scandalous if he'd just give you one moment of attention? Each question landed like a blow, and Eliza felt something inside her crack. Yes, she said quietly. That's exactly what I did. I, Eliza Whitmore, The most forgettable woman in England somehow seduced the coldest duke in the realm through sheer force of my non-existent charm. That makes perfect sense. Don't mock me. I'm not mocking you. I'm agreeing with you. Because clearly that's the only explanation anyone can accept. The idea that he might have chosen me for any other reason is just too impossible to believe. Caroline stepped closer, and in the dim light, Eliza could see tears on her sister's face. Real tears. "I've done everything right," Caroline whispered. "Everything Mother told me to do. I learned to walk gracefully, to speak properly, to laugh at men's terrible jokes and make them feel clever. I spent hours on my appearance, my accomplishments, my reputation. And you? You've done nothing. You've been nothing. And somehow you get the one thing I've been working toward my entire life." Understanding crashed over Eliza like cold water. "You wanted him," she said. "The Duke. Every woman wants him. He's powerful, wealthy, and completely unattainable. Landing him would be—" Caroline's voice broke. "It would mean I was special, that all the work, all the effort, all the trying actually mattered." For the first time in her life, Eliza saw her sister clearly. Not as the golden daughter, the favorite, the success story, but as another woman trapped in the same impossible system, fighting for scraps of value from a world that measured them both and found them wanting, just in different ways. "I don't want him," Eliza said softly. "I don't even know what just happened in there." "But he wants you." Caroline wiped her eyes angrily. "For some insane reason, he looked at you and decided you were worth his attention. And you can stand here and pretend you don't care, but I know you do. Because for once, for one single moment, someone saw you instead of me, and it felt good, didn't it?" Eliza couldn't answer. Because yes, it had felt good. Terrifying and confusing and dangerous, but good. To be seen, to be chosen, to matter, even if she didn't understand why. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I don't know what else to say." Caroline laughed, bitter and broken. "You're sorry. Perfect. That's perfect." She turned away, then stopped. "Mother wants you back inside. People are asking questions, and we need to present a united front. So smile, nod, and for the love of everything, stop looking like you've been struck by lightning. It's embarrassing." She disappeared back toward the ballroom, leaving Eliza alone in the garden. United front, family reputation, social expectations, the same chains that had bound her for 22 years, just wrapped in prettier words. Eliza looked up at the night sky. Somewhere beyond these walls, beyond Hampshire, beyond the suffocating weight of society's judgment, there had to be a world where women like her could exist without apologizing for it. But tonight, she was still here, still trapped, still trying to survive in a system designed to erase her. She took a deep breath and started back toward the ballroom. Whatever game the Duke was playing, whatever reason he had for noticing her, one thing was clear. Her invisible life was over. For better or worse, she'd been dragged into the light, and she had no idea if she'd survived the exposure. The carriage ride home was suffocating. Eliza sat pressed against the window, her mother's silence more cutting than any words. Caroline stared straight ahead, her jaw tight, while Marianne kept shooting glances between them like she was watching a play and couldn't decide which actor to focus on. When they finally arrived at Whitmore House, their mother swept inside without a word. Caroline followed, her cream silk rustling with barely contained fury. Marianne lingered just long enough to whisper, "You've really done it now," before disappearing after them. Eliza stood in the entryway, still wearing her sage green dress, still feeling the phantom pressure of the Duke's hand at her waist. "You saved me once." She climbed the stairs to her room, past the family portraits that featured her sisters prominently while she hovered in the background like an afterthought. Her room was the smallest of the three, tucked at the end of the hall, with a window that overlooked the garden rather than the front drive. Even the house had learned to hide her. She didn't sleep. How could she? Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the ballroom turning to stare, heard the whispers, felt the weight of being suddenly, terrifyingly visible. Morning came too quickly. Eliza had barely finished dressing when her mother appeared in her doorway, her face carved from ice. "Downstairs, now!" The breakfast room was already occupied. Her father sat at the head of the table, looking confused and vaguely annoyed. his default expression when forced to deal with anything beyond his ledgers and hunting schedule. Caroline picked at her food without eating. Marianne actually looked excited, which was never a good sign. "Sit," her mother commanded. Eliza sat. Her father cleared his throat. "Your mother tells me you made quite a spectacle last night. I danced with the Duke of Blackthorn when he asked me to dance. I didn't think refusing would be appropriate." "Of course you couldn't refuse," her mother snapped. "That's not the issue. The issue is what happens next." "Next? The scandal you've created, Eliza. Do you have any idea how many callers we've already had this morning? Half of Hampshire is at our door, and not because they're impressed." As if on cue, their butler appeared. "Mrs. Pemberton and Lady Ashford, madam." Eliza's mother closed her eyes briefly. "Show them to the drawing room. Tell them we'll be there momentarily." She turned back to Eliza. "You will sit quietly. You will be pleasant. You will not, under any circumstances, discuss the Duke unless directly asked, and even then, you will be appropriately modest. Do you understand?" "Yes, mother." The drawing room was already buzzing when they entered. Mrs. Pemberton sat on the settee, her purple dress somehow more aggressive in daylight. Lady Ashford perched beside her, all practiced sympathy and sharp eyes. "Mrs. Whitmore," Mrs. Pemberton began, her voice dripping false concern. "We simply had to come, after last night's unexpected events." "How kind of you," Eliza's mother said, her smile brittle. "The Duke certainly made an impression," Lady Ashford added, her gaze sliding to Eliza. "We were all quite surprised by his choice of partner." There it was, the blade hidden in silk. "The Duke was very gracious," Eliza's mother said carefully. "I'm sure he was simply being polite to all the young ladies present." "Polite?" Mrs. Pemberton's eyebrows rose. "Is that what we're calling it? Because from where I was standing, it looked rather more particular." The door opened again, more visitors. Mrs. Hartley and her daughter, then Lady Whitfield, then Mrs. Crawford with both her daughters in tow. Within an hour, the drawing room was packed with women who'd spent years barely acknowledging Eliza's existence, all desperately fishing for information. "He danced beautifully, didn't he?" Miss Hartley asked, her smile not reaching her eyes. "I suppose so," Eliza said. "Did he say anything about where he's been? What brought him back to England?" "Not really." "How curious. One would think he'd at least make conversation during a dance." Miss Hartley's tone suggested she thought Eliza was lying. Caroline, sitting rigid beside their mother, looked ready to shatter. Marianne kept shooting Eliza meaningful looks that she couldn't interpret. "Perhaps," Mrs. Crawford suggested delicately, "the Duke was simply being charitable, ensuring all the young ladies had an opportunity to dance." The implication was clear. Eliza was a charity case. "Perhaps," Eliza's mother agreed quickly, seizing the offered escape. "The Duke has always been known for his impeccable manners." "Except when he refused to dance with Lady Catherine," Mrs. Pemberton pointed out, "or Miss Thornbury, or half the eligible women in London over the past 5 years. One might almost think his manners are rather selective." The conversation continued for another hour, each question more pointed than the last, each implication more cutting. By the time the last visitor left, Eliza felt like she'd been dissected in public. "That," her mother said the moment the door closed, "was a disaster." "They were fishing for scandal," Marianne observed, trying to figure out if Eliza had compromised herself somehow. "Because that's the only explanation they can accept," Caroline said bitterly. "That she trapped him, that there's some secret shame we're hiding." "Is there?" Their father looked up from his newspaper. "Any truth to this business?" "Of course not," Eliza's mother snapped. "But the truth doesn't matter if everyone believes otherwise." A knock at the door interrupted them. The butler appeared, carrying a silver tray with a single envelope on it. "For Miss Eliza Whitmore," he announced, hand-delivered. The room went silent. Eliza took the envelope with shaking fingers. The seal was unfamiliar, a crest she didn't recognize, but the paper was expensive, the handwriting bold and precise. She broke the seal. "Miss Whitmore, I would be honored if you would join me for a drive through the park tomorrow at 2 o'clock. I will call at Whitmore House. Blackthorn." No flowery language, no explanation, just a direct request that sounded more like an order. "What does it say?" her mother demanded. Eliza handed her the letter. watched her mother's face go pale, then red, then some color that didn't exist in nature. "He wants to take you driving," her mother said slowly, like she was translating from a foreign language. "Tomorrow." "Let me see that." Her father snatched the letter, read it, then looked at Eliza like he'd never seen her before. "Blackthorn, the Duke of Blackthorn wants to take you driving." "So it appears." "This is insane," Caroline whispered. "This is absolutely insane." Marianne, however, was smiling. "This is wonderful. Don't you see? If the Duke is courting Eliza, that means—" "He's not courting her," their mother interrupted. "He can't be. There must be some other explanation." "Like what?" Eliza asked, surprised by the edge in her own voice. "What possible explanation makes sense to you? Because I'm genuinely curious what theory you've developed that doesn't require me to have done something scandalous or him to be playing some elaborate joke." Her mother's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I don't know," she admitted finally, "but this isn't normal." "No," Eliza agreed. "It really isn't." She spent the rest of the day in her room, avoiding her family and the parade of callers who kept arriving with transparent excuses. By evening, her mother had worked herself into a state of controlled panic. "You'll accept, of course," she said, appearing in Eliza's doorway. "You have to accept." "Do I?" "Refusing a duke is social suicide, especially this duke." Her mother sat on the edge of the bed, her usual rigid composure cracking. "I don't understand what's happening, Eliza. I don't understand any of this. But we have to be smart." "Smart how?" "Don't get attached. Whatever game he's playing, it will end. Men like him don't marry women like you." The words landed exactly as they were meant to, a cold, factual assessment of Eliza's worth in the marriage market. "I know," Eliza said quietly. Her mother looked at her then, really looked, and something like regret flickered across her face. "I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm trying to protect you. When this ends, and it will end, you'll still be here, still needing to find a husband. And if you've let yourself hope, if you've let yourself believe this is real, it will destroy you. So what should I do? Be pleasant, be modest, and for heaven's sake, don't embarrass us." Her mother stood. "Wear the blue dress tomorrow. It's the most flattering thing you own." She left, and Eliza sat alone in her room, staring at the letter that had turned her invisible life into something uncomfortably visible. "You saved me once." The words haunted her. If she'd saved him, if they had met before, why couldn't she remember? Her childhood was a blur of being overlooked, but surely something significant would have stuck, unless she'd been invisible even to herself. The next day arrived with agonizing slowness. Eliza let her maid fuss over her appearance, though she felt like a doll being prepared for display. The blue dress fit well enough, her hair was arranged with more care than usual, and her mother insisted on jewelry, a small necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. "Remember," her mother said as 2 o'clock approached. "Pleasant, modest, don't embarrass us." The third time she'd said it. When the Duke's carriage arrived, the entire household seemed to hold its breath. Eliza made her way downstairs to find her father attempting to look authoritative, her mother trying to appear calm, and both her sisters watching from the drawing-room doorway with expressions she couldn't quite read. The Duke stood in the entryway like he owned it. Same dark clothes, same cold expression, same unsettling intensity in his eyes when he looked at her. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "Your Grace." He offered his arm, and Eliza took it, acutely aware of her family watching every movement. The carriage was absurdly luxurious, all polished wood and soft cushions and space that felt excessive for 2 people. They rode in silence for several minutes, the park slowly coming into view. Other carriages dotted the paths, couples taking the air, mothers with daughters, the usual parade of society on display. "You're angry," the Duke said suddenly. Eliza blinked. "I'm confused." "You're both." He wasn't wrong. Eliza turned to face him, abandoning pretense. "You're destroying my life." His expression didn't change. "Explain." "Before that dance, I was invisible, forgettable. It wasn't pleasant, but it was safe. Now I'm being torn apart by every gossip in Hampshire. My family thinks I've either trapped you or you're playing some cruel game, and I have no idea why any of this is happening." She paused. "So yes, I'm angry. Would you prefer I'd left you invisible? Yes. No, I don't know. Eliza pressed her fingers to her temples. I just want to understand. You said I saved you. When? How? Because I have absolutely no memory of ever meeting you before that ballroom. The Duke was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on something beyond the carriage window. You were 12, he said finally. I was 13. It was summer. Eliza searched her memory. Summer. She'd been 12. That was the year her mother had stopped trying with her, the year she'd realized she'd never match her sisters. She'd spent most of that summer alone, exploring the woods near their estate, reading in hidden corners, avoiding family gatherings where she didn't fit. I don't remember meeting you, she said softly. You wouldn't. I wasn't the Duke then, just Adrian, the unwanted heir to a dying title, sent to stay with distant relatives in Hampshire while my father tried to drink himself to death in London. There was no emotion in his voice, just cold facts laid bare. I was angry, he continued, at my father, at the relatives who looked at me like I was some burden they'd been saddled with, at the entire world for being so relentlessly cruel. He paused. I was standing on a bridge, considering whether jumping would solve anything. Eliza's breath caught. And then you appeared, he said. This girl in a faded dress, holding a book, looking like you'd accidentally wandered into someone else's story. You didn't recognize me, didn't know who I was or what title I'd inherit. You just saw a boy standing too close to the edge. Memory flickered. Vague, uncertain, but there. A bridge, summer heat, a dark-haired boy who looked ready to shatter. You asked me if I was all right, the Duke said. Not because you wanted anything, not because you were being polite, because you actually cared whether some stranger was all right. Eliza tried to grasp the memory, but it slipped away like water through her fingers. I don't remember what I said. You said, you look like you're carrying something too heavy. Do you want to talk about it? A ghost of something passed across his face. I told you to leave me alone. You ignored me, sat down on the bridge and started reading your book, like it was the most natural thing in the world to keep company with someone who'd been cruel to you. Eliza closed her eyes. It was coming back now, in fragments. The bridge, the boy, his anger that felt familiar because she carried her own version of it. You stayed for 2 hours, the Duke continued. Didn't push me to talk. Didn't pry. Just existed beside me. And when you finally left, you said, whatever you're carrying, I hope it gets lighter. And if you ever want to set it down for a while, I'll be here tomorrow. I came back, Eliza whispered, the memory suddenly sharp. Every day for 2 weeks. You did. You never told me who you were. Because you were the only person who'd ever seen me as just human, not as a title, not as a weapon my father could use against his enemies or a burden my relatives had to manage. Just as someone who was hurting. His voice remained level, but something in it had shifted. You saved me, Eliza, not because you wanted anything from me, because you couldn't walk past someone in pain without trying to help. The carriage rolled on through the park. Other couples waved. The Duke ignored them. Then you left, Eliza said. The summer ended, and I never saw you again. My father died. I inherited the title, became the Duke of Blackthorn at 13 years old. His jaw tightened. I looked for you, tried to find out who you were, but you'd only ever told me your first name, and by the time I had resources to search properly, years had passed. I'd convinced myself I'd imagined you, that no one could actually be that kind without ulterior motive. So you came back to find me. I came back to pay a debt. Eliza turned to face him fully. This isn't a debt. You don't owe me anything for basic human decency. You gave me hope when I had none. You made me believe that not everyone in the world was calculating and cruel. His eyes met hers. That's not nothing. So what is this, gratitude? Some grand gesture to repay a childhood kindness? This is recognition. This is me refusing to let you be invisible when you deserve to be seen. By destroying my reputation in the process? Your reputation was that you didn't have one. Now you do. As what? The plain girl who somehow trapped a duke? The charity case he took pity on? The puzzle everyone's trying to solve? Eliza's voice rose despite her attempts to control it. You've made me visible, Your Grace, but visible as a spectacle, as something to be dissected and judged and found wanting. The carriage slowed. They'd completed their circuit of the park. Other carriages were turning back toward the fashionable streets, and Eliza could see faces turning to stare at them. The Duke leaned forward slightly. What would you prefer? That I'd left you alone? I don't know. The admission burst out of her. I don't know what I want because I've spent my entire life learning not to want anything, not to hope, not to expect, just to exist quietly and not make waves. That's not living. It's surviving, which is more than most women in my position can say. The Duke studied her for a long moment. You're angry at me. I'm angry at everything, at you for upending my life, at my family for caring more about scandal than my well-being, at society for measuring my worth against my sisters and finding me lacking, at myself for caring what any of you think. She met his gaze. But mostly I'm angry that some part of me, some stupid, hopeful part I thought I'd killed years ago, actually wants to believe this is real. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. It is real, he said quietly. How can it be? You don't know me. Not anymore. That girl on the bridge was 12 years old. I'm not her anymore. Neither am I the boy she saved. But that doesn't make this less real. The carriage stopped in front of Whitmore House. Eliza could see the curtains moving, her family watching, the neighbors watching, probably half of Hampshire watching. The Duke stepped out first, then offered his hand to help her down. His fingers closed around hers with the same certainty he'd shown in the ballroom. I'm not playing a game, he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. And I'm not going to disappear. So you have a choice to make. What choice? Whether you're brave enough to let yourself be seen, really seen, not as your family's afterthought or society's puzzle, but as yourself. He released her hand and bowed, that same formal gesture that somehow felt intimate. Then he was back in his carriage, and Eliza was left standing on her front step, with her heart hammering and her mind spinning. She'd barely made it inside when her mother descended. What happened? What did he say? We talked. About what? Eliza moved past her toward the stairs. About the past. What past? Eliza, you're being deliberately vague. Yes, Eliza agreed. I am. She climbed the stairs, leaving her mother sputtering, and locked herself in her room. The window overlooked the garden, the same view she'd had her entire life. But somehow it looked different now. Or maybe she was different. That night, another letter arrived. Tomorrow. Same time. B. And Eliza, standing in her small room with the letter in her hand, made a decision that terrified her. She would say yes. Not because she understood what was happening, not because she trusted it, but because the Duke was right about one thing: surviving wasn't living. And she was tired of being the girl who learned not to want anything, even if it destroyed her, even if it was all a beautiful lie. She was going to let herself hope. The drives became routine. Every afternoon at 2 o'clock, the Duke's carriage arrived, and Eliza stepped into a world that felt increasingly dangerous and increasingly necessary. They talked, not about weather or polite nothings, but about real things. He told her about inheriting a title at 13, about learning to navigate a court that saw him as either a pawn or a threat, about years spent building walls so high no one could reach him. She told him about being invisible, about watching her sisters shine while she learned to disappear, about the specific loneliness of being surrounded by family who couldn't see you. And Hampshire lost its collective mind. The gossip had gone from speculation to full-blown scandal. Mrs. Pemberton had stopped visiting, which meant she was busy spreading theories to anyone who'd listen. Lady Ashford had written a pointed letter to Eliza's mother suggesting that certain situations needed to be properly addressed before reputations were irreparably damaged. Even the vicar had made a house call, ostensibly to discuss charity work, but his meaningful glances suggested other concerns. Caroline had stopped speaking to her entirely. Marianne fluctuated between fascination and horror, and their mother had developed a permanent expression of barely contained panic. "This has to end," she said one morning, cornering Eliza in the breakfast room. Whatever arrangement you have with the Duke, it needs to conclude properly. An engagement or a withdrawal. This limbo is killing us. Us? Eliza set down her tea. Or you. Don't be flippant. Your sisters have been cut from invitation lists because of this. Caroline was supposed to attend Lady Morton's house party next week. The invitation was revoked. Do you understand what that means? That Lady Morton is more interested in gossip than hospitality? Her mother's hand slammed down on the table. It means your scandal is destroying their prospects. It means every connection we've worked years to build is crumbling because you've made us all look like fools or conspirators or both. The words hung in the air, sharp and final. I'm sorry, Eliza said quietly. And she was. Not for the drives, not for letting herself hope, but for the collateral damage she couldn't prevent. Sorry doesn't fix this. Her mother's voice cracked. You need to end it, Eliza, today. Tell him you can't continue these drives. Tell him whatever you need to tell him. But end it before there's nothing left to salvage. And if I don't want to end it, then you're more selfish than I thought. The accusation landed like a physical blow. Selfish, for wanting something, for daring to hope that maybe, just maybe, she deserved to be chosen. When the Duke's carriage arrived that afternoon, Eliza climbed in with her mother's words echoing in her head. Adrian, she'd started thinking of him as Adrian, though she'd never said it aloud, noticed immediately. What happened? My mother wants me to stop seeing you. He didn't look surprised. And? And she's right. This is destroying my family. My sisters are being punished for my… whatever this is. The scandal is spreading. People we've known for years are cutting us off. So you're here to end this? It wasn't a question. Eliza met his eyes, those dark, intense eyes that saw too much. I'm here because I don't know what to do, she admitted. Because part of me knows my mother is right. That continuing this will hurt people I care about. But another part… She stopped, the words catching in her throat. Another part wants to be selfish, Adrian finished. Wants to choose yourself for once. That makes me terrible, doesn't it? That makes you human. The carriage rolled through the park, passing other couples who stared and whispered. Eliza had stopped caring about their judgment. That was the strange thing. The more visible she became, the less their opinions seemed to matter. Tell me something, Adrian said. If there were no consequences, no scandal, no damage to your family, would you still want to end this? No. The answer came without hesitation, and it terrified her. Then don't, he said simply. It's not that simple. I can't just ignore the harm I'm causing. You're not causing harm. Society is. There's a difference. Is there? When the result is the same. Adrian turned to face her fully. Your family is being punished because I chose you over your sisters. Because I refuse to play by society's rules about who deserves attention and who doesn't. That's not your fault. That's mine. Then maybe you should… What? Abandon you? Pretend the last 2 weeks didn't happen? Go back to treating you like you're invisible? His voice was harder now, edged with something that might have been anger. Is that what you want? I want my family to stop suffering because of me. They're not suffering because of you. They're suffering because they care more about what Hampshire thinks than about your happiness. The truth of it stung. Eliza turned to look out the window, watching the familiar landscape blur past. Her whole life had been shaped by what others thought, her worth measured by their judgment, her value determined by their approval. I'm tired, she said quietly. I'm so tired of being measured and found wanting, of being the daughter they're ashamed of, the sister who ruins things just by existing. Then stop letting them measure you. How? I live in their house. I depend on their support. I can't just… Marry me. The world stopped. Eliza turned slowly, certain she'd misheard. But Adrian was watching her with that same intense focus, his expression unreadable. What? Marry me, he repeated. Leave their house, build a life that doesn't require their approval or society's permission. You're insane. Probably. We barely know each other. We've spent every afternoon together for 2 weeks. We knew each other as children. We understand each other's pain. He paused. That's more than most society marriages start with. Eliza's heart was racing. This was impossible. Dukes didn't marry forgotten daughters. Men of his status didn't choose women like her unless there was some hidden advantage, some political gain, some— Stop, Adrian said, reading her thoughts. Stop trying to find the trick. There isn't one. Then why? Why me? Because you're the only person who's ever made me feel less alone. Because I've spent 3 years abroad trying to forget you and failing. Because the moment I saw you in that ballroom, I knew I'd been lying to myself about moving past what you meant to me. His voice was steady, factual, like he was stating obvious truths. And because I'm tired too, tired of being what everyone expects. Tired of playing the cold duke who doesn't need anyone. Tired of being alone. Eliza couldn't breathe. This was too much, too fast, too real. This is insane, she repeated. Yes. My family will think I trapped you. Society will tear us apart. Everyone will assume— Let them assume. Adrian leaned forward. I'm not asking you to be brave, Eliza. I know what I'm asking costs, but I'm asking anyway. Marry me. Choose yourself. Choose us. The carriage had stopped. Eliza realized they were back at Whitmore House. Through the window, she could see her mother watching from the drawing room, Caroline beside her, both their faces tight with anxiety. I need time, Eliza said. I need to think. Take all the time you need. But something in his expression suggested time was running out. Eliza climbed out of the carriage on shaking legs, made it to the front door, turned back to find Adrian still watching her. Tomorrow? He asked. She nodded because she couldn't speak. Inside, her mother was waiting. Well? He asked me to marry him. The words fell into the silence like stones into water. Her mother's face went white, then red, then some terrible combination of both. He what? Asked me to marry him, formally, with intention to follow through. Caroline appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of disbelief. That's not possible. Apparently it is. What did you say? Her mother demanded. I said I needed time to think. Time to think? Her mother's voice rose to something close to a shriek. The Duke of Blackthorn proposes marriage, and you need time to think? Yes. Are you completely mad? Do you have any idea what this means? It means I'd be a duchess, Eliza said quietly. It means leaving this house. It means saving this family. Her mother grabbed her shoulders. Don't you understand? If you marry him, all of this, the scandal, the gossip, the damage, it all becomes a romantic story instead of a disaster. Caroline and Marianne's prospects improve instead of deteriorating. We become the family that produced a duchess instead of the family consumed by scandal. So I should marry him to save your reputations. You should marry him because he's a duke, and you're a nobody who will never get a better offer. The brutality of it hung between them. Her mother seemed to realize what she'd said, her face crumpling slightly, but she didn't take it back. I need to think, Eliza repeated, pulling away. She climbed the stairs to her room, locked the door, and sank onto her bed. A proposal. An actual proposal from a man who claimed to want her not despite who she was, but because of it. It was everything she'd never let herself dream about. It was also terrifying. Because her mother was right about one thing. This would solve everything for her family. The scandal would transform into a fairy tale. Her sisters would benefit from the connection. The Whitmore name would rise instead of sink. But was that why she should marry him? To fix her family's problems? To prove she wasn't worthless? Or should she marry him because when she was with him, she felt seen? Because their conversations felt real in a way nothing else in her life did? Because the thought of going back to being invisible made her want to scream? She didn't sleep that night, just sat by her window, watching the garden and thinking about bridges and lonely boys and girls who stayed when they should have walked away. Morning came with a knock at her door. Eliza, Marianne's voice. Can I come in? Eliza unlocked the door. Her younger sister slipped inside, still in her dressing gown. Mother's downstairs planning your wedding, Marianne said. She's already written to 3 dressmakers. I haven't said yes. But you will. Marianne sat on the bed. Won't you? I don't know. Caroline thinks you should refuse. She says you'll be miserable married to a man who only wants you out of guilt or obligation, or whatever complicated emotion he's operating under. What do you think? Marianne was quiet for a moment. I think you've spent your whole life making yourself small so the rest of us could shine. And I think this is the first time you've ever been offered something that's just yours. So I think you should take it, even if it's a mistake. Especially if it's a mistake. At least it'll be your mistake. Marianne smiled sadly. Better than spending the rest of your life being our mistake. After she left, Eliza stood in front of her mirror. The same face she'd seen every morning for 22 years looked back, unremarkable, plain, forgettable. But maybe that wasn't all she was. Maybe there was something else there, something worth choosing. She dressed carefully and went downstairs. Her mother was indeed planning a wedding, papers spread across her desk, her expression a mixture of manic joy and lingering anxiety. There you are. We need to discuss dates. The Duke will want something soon, I imagine, to quiet the gossip. But we'll need time for a proper— I need to speak with him first, Eliza interrupted. Alone, really alone. Not a carriage ride through the park where everyone can see us. Her mother's eyes narrowed. That's not appropriate. None of this is appropriate. I need to talk to him without an audience, without performance. If I'm going to make this decision, I need to know it's real. After a long moment, her mother nodded. I'll arrange it. The meeting was set for that evening. Not at Whitmore House, too public, too many witnesses. Instead, at a small property the Duke owned on the outskirts of Hampshire. A hunting lodge, rarely used, sufficiently private. Eliza's mother insisted on accompanying her in the carriage, though she agreed to wait outside. Caroline refused to even look at her as she left. Marianne squeezed her hand. The lodge was smaller than Eliza expected. Comfortable, but not ostentatious. Adrian was waiting inside, standing by a window, looking somehow more real without the carriage and the park and the performance of society watching. Your mother is terrified I'm going to compromise you, he said without preamble. She made me promise to leave the door open and stay in sight of the windows. Did you promise? Yes. I keep my promises. They stood in the fading light, and Eliza realized this was it, the moment where she had to decide. Tell me the truth, she said. Why do you really want to marry me? I already told you. Then tell me again, without the carriage and the audience and the pressure. Just tell me why. Adrian moved closer, and Eliza could see the exhaustion in his face, the weight he carried that looked so much like her own. Because I'm 30 years old and I've never felt at home anywhere, he said. Not in my father's house, not at court, not in any of the places I'm supposed to belong. But when I'm with you, I don't feel like I'm performing. I don't feel like I have to be the Duke or the heir or the cold bastard everyone expects. I just feel like myself. That's not love. No, he agreed. It's not. Not yet. But it's honest. And it's more than most people get. Eliza turned away, her mind spinning. My mother thinks I should marry you to save the family's reputation. My sister thinks I should refuse because you're only proposing out of guilt, and I don't know which of them is right. What do you think? I think I'm terrified. I think this feels too good to be real. I think I've spent so long learning not to want anything that I don't know how to let myself have something. She turned back to face him. And I think if I say yes, I'll spend the rest of my life waiting for you to realize you made a mistake. Then let me be clear. Adrian's voice was harder now, more direct. I don't make mistakes. Not about things that matter. When I commit to something, I commit completely. If you marry me, I won't change my mind. I won't wake up one day and decide you're not enough. I won't treat you like an obligation or a burden or a debt to be paid. How can you promise that? Because I've spent 3 years trying to convince myself I could be happy alone. And I can't. I've tried to forget what it felt like when someone actually saw me as human, and I can't. He stepped closer. You saved me once, Eliza. Let me save you back. Not from anything external, from the lie you've been telling yourself, that you don't deserve to be chosen, that you're not worth fighting for, that wanting something for yourself makes you selfish. Eliza's eyes burned. You're asking me to be brave. I'm asking you to be honest. Do you want this? Not because it saves your family, not because it's a good match. Do you want me? The question hung in the air between them, sharp and unavoidable, and Eliza standing in the fading light of a hunting lodge with a man who saw her when no one else did, made her choice. "Yes," she whispered. "I want this. I want you, even though it terrifies me, even though I don't know if I can be what you need. Yes." Adrian's expression shifted, something close to relief flooding his features. He reached for her hand, and when his fingers closed around hers, it felt like signing a contract in flesh and bone. "Then we'll figure out the rest together." They stood there in the silence, holding hands like children making a pact, and Eliza felt something shift inside her. Some wall she'd built crumbling, some door she'd locked opening. When they emerged from the lodge, her mother took one look at Eliza's face and burst into tears. Not sad tears, relieved tears, triumphant tears. She said yes, her mother announced to no one in particular. She actually said yes. The carriage ride home was a blur of her mother's planning and plotting and excitement. But Eliza barely heard it. She was too busy thinking about what she'd just done. She'd chosen herself. For the first time in her life, she'd chosen what she wanted over what everyone else needed. It felt like falling and flying at the same time. When they reached Whitmore House, Caroline was waiting in the entrance hall. She took one look at Eliza and went pale. "You accepted." "I did." "You actually accepted a proposal from a man you barely know. A man who's been playing some kind of game with you. A man who will probably ruin you the moment the novelty wears off." "Maybe," Eliza said, "or maybe I'll ruin him first." "This is insane." "Yes," Eliza agreed, echoing Adrian's words. "It really is." Caroline's face crumpled. "I hate you," she whispered. "I've done everything right, everything Mother told me to do, and you've done nothing. You've been nothing, and somehow you win." The pain in her sister's voice cut deeper than any insult. "I didn't win," Eliza said quietly. "I just stopped losing." "Same thing." "No, it's really not." She started toward the stairs, but Caroline's voice stopped her. "He'll hurt you," Caroline said. "Men like that always do. And when he does, don't come crying to me. Don't expect sympathy from any of us. You made your choice. You chose him over your family." "I chose myself," Eliza corrected. "For the first time in my life, I chose myself." She climbed the stairs to her small room, knowing it wouldn't be her room much longer. Soon she'd leave this house, this life, this identity she'd worn like an ill-fitting dress for 22 years, and step into something unknown. That night, lying in bed, Eliza let herself feel the full weight of what she'd done, the terror of it, the impossibility of it, the absolute insanity of agreeing to marry a man she barely knew, a life she couldn't imagine, a future that felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. But she'd stood at the edge before, on a bridge 10 years ago, next to a boy who was ready to jump. She'd chosen to stay then. She was choosing to stay now. And whatever came next, scandal or fairy tale, disaster or triumph, it would be hers, her choice, her life. Finally. The next morning, the announcement appeared in the papers. Formal, brief, devastating in its simplicity. The Duke of Blackthorn is pleased to announce his engagement to Miss Eliza Whitmore of Hampshire. The wedding will take place in 4 weeks. 4 weeks. 1 month to prepare. 1 month before her invisible life ended completely. Eliza sat at breakfast, staring at the announcement while her mother fluttered around planning and her sisters sat in rigid silence. And then the letters started arriving, dozens of them, hundreds eventually, from friends, from enemies, from people she'd never met who had opinions about her life, her choice, her audacity. Most were vicious. Some questioned her morals, others questioned her sanity. A few suggested outright that she'd trapped the Duke through scandalous means. One particularly creative letter theorized she'd used witchcraft. But scattered among the poison were other letters, from women who'd been overlooked, from daughters who'd lived in their sisters' shadows, from people who understood what it meant to be invisible and were shocked to see someone like them chosen. Those letters Eliza kept. The next 4 weeks blurred into a nightmare of preparation. Dressmakers, planners, endless decisions about flowers and music and seating arrangements. Her mother had transformed from anxious to manic, determined to prove that the Whitmores could produce a duchess worthy of the title. Caroline stopped speaking to her entirely. Marianne fluctuated between support and resentment, and Eliza felt increasingly like she was watching her own life from a distance, disconnected from the frenzy surrounding her. She saw Adrian 3 more times before the wedding. Brief, supervised meetings where they discussed logistics and practicalities and everything except what mattered, until the night before the wedding. He appeared at Whitmore House unannounced, asking to speak with her privately. Her mother, drunk on wedding excitement and social climbing, actually allowed it. They stood in the library alone for the first time since the lodge. "Are you having second thoughts?" Adrian asked. "Constantly," Eliza admitted. "You?" "No." The certainty in his voice should have been comforting. Instead, it was terrifying. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've spent my entire life being sure about everything. It's the only way I've survived." He moved closer. "But with you, I'm not operating from certainty. I'm operating from choice, and that's different. What if I'm not what you think I am? What if the girl you remember from that bridge doesn't exist anymore? Then I'll get to know the woman you've become instead." Eliza laughed, bitter and broken. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most delusional. Can't I be both?" They stood in the library, surrounded by books. Neither of them was reading, and Eliza felt the full weight of tomorrow pressing down on her. "I'm going to disappoint you," she whispered. "Eventually. I'm going to be too plain or too quiet or too damaged from years of being invisible, and you're going to regret this." "No," Adrian said firmly. "I won't. But you might. You might wake up one day and realize you married me out of desperation or rebellion or some need to prove you were worth choosing. And if that happens, I'll deal with it. But I won't regret choosing you." "Even if I'm a mistake?" "You're not a mistake. You're the only thing I've done right in years." He left after that, and Eliza stood alone in the library, her heart hammering, her mind racing. Tomorrow she would marry a duke. Tomorrow her invisible life would end. Tomorrow she would step into a future she couldn't imagine with a man she barely knew. And she was absolutely terrified. But she was also, for the first time in her life, choosing to be terrified on her own terms. The wedding morning arrived cold and bright. Eliza woke in her small room, knowing it was the last time she'd wake there. Her mother had cried. Marianne had hugged her. Caroline had left the room. The ceremony itself was a blur. The church packed with people who'd spent years ignoring her, now desperate to witness her transformation. Adrian stood at the altar, looking exactly as cold and controlled as his reputation suggested. But when Eliza reached him, when their eyes met, something in his expression softened. "Still sure?" he murmured. "Absolutely not," she whispered back. "You?" "Never been more sure of anything." The vows were traditional, the binding was legal, and when it was done, Eliza Whitmore ceased to exist. In her place stood the Duchess of Blackthorn, and she had no idea who that person was. The first thing Eliza noticed about Blackthorn Hall was the silence. Not peaceful silence, the kind that pressed against your ears like water, heavy and suffocating. The carriage had pulled up to a massive stone structure that looked more like a fortress than a home. All gray walls and narrow windows, and an entrance that seemed designed to intimidate rather than welcome. "It's not much," Adrian said, which had to be the understatement of the century. "It's terrifying," Eliza corrected. "That too." The staff lined up in the entrance hall, at least 30 people, all wearing identical expressions of polite curiosity mixed with barely concealed judgment. The housekeeper, Mrs. Daventry, was a tall woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that catalogued Eliza's worth in approximately 3 seconds and found her lacking. "Your Grace," she said, curtsying to Adrian. Then, after a noticeable pause, "Your Grace," to Eliza, the title sounding forced. "Mrs. Daventry runs the household," Adrian explained. "She's been here since I was a child, knows the estate better than I do." "Welcome to Blackthorn Hall," Mrs. Daventry said, her tone suggesting Eliza was anything but welcome. "I've prepared the Duchess's apartments. They haven't been used since the late Duchess passed, but we've aired them out." The late Duchess. Adrian's mother, who died when he was 7. Eliza wondered if anyone had actually lived in those rooms since, or if they'd just been preserved like a museum to a woman no one remembered. "I'll need to see them," Eliza said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "And I'd like to meet with the senior staff tomorrow. Understand how the household runs. Mrs. Daventry's eyebrows rose slightly. Of course, Your Grace. Though I should mention that the household runs quite efficiently as is. We've maintained His Grace's standards for years. Translation: We don't need you changing things. I'm sure you have, Eliza said evenly, but I'd still like to understand the systems in place. She could feel Adrian watching her, but she didn't look at him. This was the first test, and she knew it. Show weakness now, and she'd never recover. The Duchess's apartments were exactly as cold as she'd expected. Beautiful, certainly. All silk wallpaper and expensive furniture, and windows overlooking grounds that stretched to the horizon. But empty. Lifeless. Like a stage set waiting for an actor who'd never arrived. You can change anything you want, Adrian said from the doorway. Redecorate, reorganize. This is your space now. Is it? Eliza turned to face him. Because it feels like I'm moving into a shrine to a woman I'll never measure up to. My mother was miserable here. The blunt statement startled her. Adrian moved into the room, looking around like he was seeing it for the first time. She married my father for his title, he married her for her dowry, and they spent 15 years making each other systematically unhappy. She died when I was 7, and I'm not sure anyone actually mourned. They just preserved her rooms because that's what you do. That's horrible. That's aristocracy. He met her eyes. I don't want that for us. Then what do you want? I want you to make this place feel less like a mausoleum and more like somewhere a person could actually live. After he left, Eliza stood in the center of the Duchess's apartments and felt the full weight of what she'd agreed to. This wasn't just a marriage. It was inheriting a role, a household, an entire identity that had nothing to do with who she actually was. The plain girl from Hampshire was supposed to transform into a duchess overnight. She had no idea how to do that. That night, dinner was served in a dining room large enough to host 40 people. Just the two of them sat at opposite ends of a table that could have doubled as a landing strip, served by footmen who moved with silent efficiency. This is ridiculous, Eliza said after the third course arrived. I know. Can we eat somewhere else? Somewhere we can actually have a conversation without shouting? Adrian looked surprised, then something like relieved. The library? They abandoned the formal dining room for a smaller space lined with books, where actual fires burned and the furniture looked like it had been used by humans instead of preserved for display. The food was transferred, the servants dismissed, and suddenly it was just the two of them. Better? Adrian asked. Much. They ate in silence for a while. Then Eliza asked the question that had been burning in her mind since the wedding. What do you actually expect from me? Adrian set down his fork. What do you mean? I mean, I don't know how to be a duchess. I don't know how to run a household this size, or navigate society at this level, or manage whatever responsibilities come with this title. I've spent my entire life being invisible, and now I'm supposed to be this. She gestured vaguely at the room, the estate, the impossible scope of her new life. So what do you expect? I expect you to figure it out, Adrian said simply. The same way I had to figure out how to be a duke at 13. That's not helpful. It's honest. He leaned forward. There's no manual for this, Eliza. No guidebook that tells you how to transform from one life to another. You just do it. You make mistakes. You learn. You adapt. And if I fail, then you fail. And then you try again. It should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt like being thrown into deep water and told to swim. The next morning, Eliza met with the senior staff as planned. Mrs. Daventry had assembled the key household members in the housekeeper's sitting room, the butler, the head cook, the estate manager, and several others whose titles Eliza struggled to remember. Thank you all for coming, she began, feeling absurdly formal. I wanted to introduce myself properly and understand how Blackthorn Hall operates. The household runs on a well-established schedule, Your Grace, Mrs. Daventry said. His Grace prefers minimal disruption to routine. I'm sure he does, but I'm not asking to disrupt anything. I'm asking to understand it. She spent the next hour asking questions. How many staff worked at the estate? What were their responsibilities? How were supplies managed? What traditions existed that she should know about? Mrs. Daventry answered with increasing stiffness, clearly unused to being questioned. The other staff members looked uncomfortable, caught between their longtime housekeeper and their new duchess. "The estate has run efficiently for decades," Mrs. Daventry finally said. "I'm not sure what you're hoping to change, Your Grace." "I'm not trying to change anything," Eliza said, though that wasn't entirely true. "I'm trying to learn." "Is that really so threatening?" The housekeeper's face went rigid. "Of course not, Your Grace." But it was. Eliza could see it in her expression, in the way the other staff members shifted uncomfortably. Change was threatening. The new duchess asking questions was threatening. The disruption to their established order was threatening. And Eliza was suddenly, furiously angry about it. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice harder than she'd ever heard it. "I didn't ask to be duchess. I didn't grow up training for this role. But I'm here now, and I'm going to do my best to fulfill my responsibilities. That means understanding how this household works. If that makes any of you uncomfortable, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to apologize for wanting to learn." Silence. Then the estate manager, a gruff man named Crawford, cleared his throat. "What would you like to know first, Your Grace?" It was a small victory, but it felt enormous. Over the next week, Eliza threw herself into learning everything she could. She walked the estate with Crawford, understanding the land holdings and tenant farms. She reviewed household accounts with the butler, shocked by the sheer scale of expenses. She spent hours in the kitchens, much to the cook's horror, learning how food was prepared for a house this size. And slowly, grudgingly, the staff began to warm to her. Not because she was charming or beautiful or everything a duchess should be, but because she actually cared, because she asked questions and listened to answers and treated them like human beings instead of invisible servants. "You're making them nervous," Adrian observed one evening. "Good. They've been too comfortable. Mrs. Daventry came to me today, said you'd reorganize the linen storage. It was a disaster. No system whatsoever. I just created categories so things could actually be found." Adrian's lips twitched. "She's been running that household for 20 years. Then she should have organized the linens better." He laughed, an actual laugh, surprised and genuine. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone more careful, more worried about stepping on toes." "I've spent my entire life being careful," Eliza said. "It got me nowhere. So now I'm trying something different." The real test came 2 weeks after the wedding, when Adrian announced they'd be hosting a dinner party. "Just a small gathering," he said. 10 couples, some neighboring landowners, a few friends from London, nothing too formal. Eliza stared at him. "You want me to host a dinner party?" "You're the duchess. That's part of the job." "I've never hosted anything in my life." "Then this will be educational." She wanted to kill him. Instead, she threw herself into preparation with the same intensity she'd applied to learning the household. She consulted with the cook about menus, with Mrs. Daventry about table settings, with Adrian about which topics to avoid in conversation. The night of the dinner, she stood in front of her mirror wearing a gown that cost more than her father earned in a year, trying not to panic. "You look beautiful," Adrian said from the doorway. "I look terrified." "That too." He moved closer, adjusting something on her dress that didn't need adjusting. "They're going to judge you. Some will be cruel, some will dismiss you. Some will decide before they even meet you that you're not worthy of the title." "Is this supposed to be helping?" "I'm telling you what to expect so you're not surprised." His eyes met hers. "But here's what they don't know. You survived being invisible in your own family. You survived being the daughter no one wanted. You survived 22 years of being overlooked and dismissed and told you didn't matter. This dinner party is nothing compared to that." The guests arrived like an invading force. Lady Ashford was there, of course, along with Mrs. Pemberton and several other Hampshire families who'd spent years ignoring Eliza's existence. From London came Lord and Lady Thornbury, along with 2 other couples Eliza didn't recognize. "Your Grace," Lady Ashford said, curtsying with just enough delay to be insulting. "What a lovely home you have." "Thank you," Eliza said evenly, "though of course the credit goes to those who came before me." "Of course." Lady Ashford's smile was sharp. "It must be quite overwhelming managing an estate of this size. I imagine you're still learning the ropes. Every day brings new lessons. How fortunate that His Grace is so patient." The barb was clear. Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks but forced herself to smile. I find patience is easier when two people actually respect each other. Lady Ashford's expression flickered. Score 1 for the invisible girl. Dinner was a gauntlet. Eliza sat at the head of the table, Adrian at the other end, while their guests discussed politics and society and a dozen other topics she barely understood. She contributed when she could, stayed quiet when she couldn't, and tried not to notice Mrs. Pemberton's meaningful glances every time she made a mistake. Then Lady Thornbury, a sharp-eyed woman from London, turned the conversation in a dangerous direction. "Tell me, Your Grace," she said to Eliza. "How exactly did you and the Duke meet? The story seems rather vague in society papers." The table went quiet. Everyone was listening now. Eliza could have lied, could have given some sanitized version that made her sound better, more worthy. But she was tired of pretending. "We met as children," she said. "I found him on a bridge looking like he wanted to jump off it. I stayed with him until he didn't. He remembered. I didn't. 10 years later, he came back to find me." Complete silence. Then Lady Thornbury laughed, a genuine sound. "Well, that's certainly more interesting than the usual courtship story." "His Grace has always been unconventional," Lord Thornbury added. "Unconventional," Mrs. Pemberton repeated faintly. "Yes, that's certainly one word for it." But something had shifted. Eliza had given them the truth, messy and weird and completely outside normal social conventions. And instead of destroying her, it had made her real. After dinner, the women withdrew to the drawing room while the men stayed for port. Eliza found herself surrounded by the same women who'd spent years ignoring her, now forced to treat her as an equal. "You've certainly made an impression," Lady Ashford said, her tone unreadable. "I'm not trying to make an impression. I'm just trying to survive." "Is that what you call it? Marrying a duke?" "I call it making the best choice I could with the options I had." Lady Thornbury, who'd been quiet since her earlier question, spoke up. "I like you, Duchess. You're honest. It's refreshing." "Thank you," Eliza said, surprised. "Oh, don't thank me yet. Honest people make enemies faster than dishonest ones. You've already made several tonight." She wasn't wrong. Eliza could see it in the tight smiles, the whispered conversations, the assessment happening in real time. These women were deciding whether she was a threat, an ally, or something to be destroyed, but she'd survived worse judgment. She'd survived being nothing. Being something, even something they hated, was almost easier. When the guests finally left, Eliza collapsed into a chair in the library, exhausted. "You did well," Adrian said, appearing with 2 glasses of wine. "I was terrible. I said the wrong things. I didn't know half the references. Lady Ashford looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe." "Lady Ashford looks at everyone like that. It's her natural expression." He handed her a glass. "But you were honest. You told them the truth about how we met. That took courage. Or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing." Eliza sipped the wine, feeling the tension slowly drain from her shoulders. "I don't know if I can do this. The hosting, the socializing, the performing. It's exhausting." "Then don't perform. Just be yourself." "Myself got ignored for 22 years. Yourself saved a boy from jumping off a bridge." Adrian sat across from her. "Yourself survived being invisible in a family that should have seen you. Yourself was brave enough to marry a near stranger and move to a terrifying estate and face down a household of skeptical servants and a dinner party of people waiting for you to fail. That self is stronger than you think." Eliza looked at him. This man she'd married who was still mostly a stranger despite everything. "Do you actually believe that? Or are you just trying to make me feel better?" "I believe it," he said simply. "I wouldn't have married you otherwise." Over the following weeks, something unexpected happened. Eliza started to find her footing, not perfectly. She still made mistakes, still fumbled social situations, still felt like an imposter in her own life. But she stopped apologizing for it, stopped trying to be the Duchess everyone expected, and started being the Duchess she actually was. She reorganized the household systems, much to Mrs. Daventry's horror and eventual grudging approval. She started visiting the tenant farms, talking to the families who worked the land, understanding their struggles and needs. She discovered the estate had a library that hadn't been properly cataloged in decades and spent hours organizing it. And slowly, grudgingly, Blackthorn Hall began to feel less like a mausoleum and more like a place where people actually lived. The staff stopped looking at her like she was temporary, started asking her opinion instead of just Adrian's. Mrs. Daventry even smiled at her once, which felt like a major diplomatic achievement. But society was a different battle. The invitations came, not because people liked her, but because refusing to invite a duchess was social suicide. Eliza attended balls and dinners and endless afternoon teas, always aware that she was being watched, judged, measured against some invisible standard she'd never meet. At one particularly brutal tea party, Mrs. Pemberton cornered her. "You must be so proud," she said, her smile venomous. "From nothing to duchess. Quite the transformation." "Yes," Eliza agreed, "though I'd argue I was never nothing, just overlooked." "Of course, my apologies." Mrs. Pemberton's tone suggested she was anything but apologetic. "Though one does wonder how long such an unusual match will last." "As long as we want it to," Eliza said evenly, "which, barring disaster, should be the rest of our lives." Such confidence. I suppose that's what comes from marrying above your station. You have everything to gain and nothing to lose. The accusation hung between them, that Eliza was a social climber, a fortune hunter, someone who'd trapped a duke for her own advancement. Eliza set down her teacup with deliberate care. "You're right," she said. "I did marry above my station, because my station, as determined by people like you, was nowhere. I was the plain daughter, the forgettable one, the girl you spent 22 years ignoring because I wasn't pretty enough or charming enough or worth your time. So yes, I married up, and I'm not going to apologize for choosing something better than being invisible." Mrs. Pemberton's face went white, then red. "How dare you?" "I dare because I'm a duchess now," Eliza interrupted. "And while I may not have been born to the role, while I may make mistakes and struggle and never quite fit the mold you think I should, I'm still a duchess, which means you have to be polite to me, even when you hate me, even when you think I don't deserve it. Because that's how this system works, isn't it? The same system that told me I was worthless now tells you to treat me with respect. Ironic, isn't it?" She walked away before Mrs. Pemberton could respond, her heart hammering but her head high. Later, Lady Thornbury found her on the terrace. "That was spectacular," she said. "That was probably career suicide." "Perhaps, but it was honest." Lady Thornbury smiled. "Mrs. Pemberton has spent 20 years being the most vicious gossip in Hampshire. Someone needed to put her in her place. I'm glad it was you." "You don't think I just made a powerful enemy?" "Oh, you definitely did. But you also just earned something far more valuable." Lady Thornbury paused. "Respect. The people who witnessed that saw you stand up for yourself. Not with grace or propriety or any of the things we're taught to value. With pure, honest anger. And that, Duchess, is something this society desperately needs more of." The real turning point came 6 weeks after the wedding. Adrian received word that his uncle, Lord Pemberton, yes, Mrs. Pemberton's husband, was hosting a ball, the first major society event since their marriage, an opportunity for Hampshire's elite to formally assess the new Duchess of Blackthorn. "We don't have to go," Adrian said. "Yes, we do," Eliza corrected, "because if we don't, it looks like we're hiding. You're not ready for this." "I'll never be ready, but I'm going anyway." The night of the ball, Eliza wore a gown that had cost a small fortune, deep green silk that actually made her look like she belonged in a duchess's wardrobe. Her maid had worked magic with her hair. Her jewelry was real. But she still felt like the plain girl from Hampshire playing dress-up. "You look terrified," Adrian observed as their carriage approached the Pemberton estate. "I am terrified." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp." He took her hand. "Remember, you've already survived worse than this. They're just people. Judgmental, cruel, small-minded people, but just people." The ballroom was packed. Every important family in the region had turned out to witness the spectacle. Conversation stopped as Eliza and Adrian entered. Eyes turned. Whispers started. Mrs. Pemberton approached, her smile tight and dangerous. "Your Graces, how wonderful that you could attend." "Thank you for the invitation," Eliza said evenly. Of course. We're all so curious to see how you're settling into your new role. Mrs. Pemberton's eyes glittered. Managing an estate like Blackthorn must be quite the challenge for someone of your background. There it was. The opening shot. Eliza could feel the room watching, waiting to see how she'd respond. She could retreat, play modest, accept the implicit insult with grace, or she could do something different. You're absolutely right, Eliza said clearly, her voice carrying. It is challenging. Learning to run a household of that size, manage tenant relations, navigate society at this level, it's all completely new to me. I make mistakes constantly. Mrs. Pemberton's expression shifted to something like triumph. But here's what I've learned, Eliza continued. Running an estate well isn't about being born knowing how. It's about being willing to learn, to ask questions, to listen to people who know more than you do, to admit when you're wrong and adapt. And I may not have been raised to be a duchess, but I was raised to survive, to watch and learn and figure out how systems work so I could navigate them. Turns out those skills transfer pretty well. The room had gone completely quiet. The tenants seemed to think so, she added. I visited every farm on the estate, talked to every family, listened to their concerns and actually tried to address them. Apparently the previous duchess never bothered, too busy maintaining her status to care about the people who worked the land that funded it. Mrs. Pemberton's face had gone from triumph to rage. How dare you criticize? I'm not criticizing, Eliza said calmly. I'm stating facts. The previous Duchess of Blackthorn maintained perfect social propriety while the estate infrastructure crumbled. I'm doing the opposite, prioritizing substance over appearance, results over reputation. And if that makes me a poor duchess by your standards, I can live with that. Lady Thornberry started clapping. Slowly at first, then with genuine enthusiasm. Others joined, not everyone, but enough. A scattering of applause that grew into something real. Mrs. Pemberton stood frozen, her carefully orchestrated humiliation turned against her. And Eliza, the plain girl from Hampshire, the forgotten daughter, the woman who was supposed to fail, stood in the center of a Hampshire ballroom and felt something she'd never felt before. Power. Not the kind that came from beauty or birth or playing by society's rules, the kind that came from refusing to apologize for existing, from demanding to be seen on her own terms, from being strong enough to survive in a system designed to crush her and then changing that system from the inside. Would you care to dance, Duchess? Adrian appeared at her elbow, his expression unreadable. I'd love to. They moved onto the floor, and this time, when the room turned to watch, Eliza didn't flinch, didn't hide, just danced with her husband while Hampshire's elite tried to figure out what the hell had just happened. That was dangerous, Adrian murmured. I know. You've made serious enemies. I know that too. And you don't care. Oh, I care, Eliza said. But I'm done being afraid of people who've spent years proving they don't matter. Adrian smiled then, a real smile, warm and genuine. There she is. Who? The girl from the bridge, the one who stayed when she should have walked away, the one who saw someone hurting and refused to leave them alone. He pulled her closer. I knew she was still in there. After the dance, people approached, not to judge or assess, but to actually talk. Some were genuine, some were clearly trying to ally themselves with what they now saw as power. But Eliza no longer cared about the difference. She'd spent 22 years being invisible because she believed she deserved to be. She was done believing that. The ball continued. Eliza danced and talked and navigated society with a confidence that came not from knowing she was doing everything right, but from no longer caring if she wasn't. And when they finally left, when the carriage rolled away from the Pemberton estate, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. You've changed, Adrian observed. Have I? When we married, you were still carrying all those years of being invisible, still believing, on some level, that you didn't deserve to be chosen. He paused. That's gone now. Not gone, Eliza corrected. Just quieter. I still have moments where I can't believe this is real, where I'm convinced I'm about to wake up back in my small room at Whitmore House and discover this was all a dream. And when you have those moments, I remind myself that dreams don't require this much work. She smiled. Real life is much more exhausting. That night, back at Blackthorn Hall, Eliza stood in her apartments, the ones she'd finally started to make her own, with books and personal touches and evidence that someone actually lived there. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw for the first time not the plain girl from Hampshire or the Duchess she was supposed to be, just herself. Flawed and uncertain and still figuring it out, but herself. And that was enough. The next morning brought a letter from her mother, brief, formal, acknowledging Eliza's successful navigation of society as Duchess of Blackthorn. No apology for years of dismissal, no recognition of the pain she'd caused, just a cold acknowledgement that Eliza had achieved something worth acknowledging. Eliza burned it. Then she sat down and wrote her own letter. To Marianne, the only family member who'd shown her genuine kindness, telling her about the ball, about finding her footing, about discovering that being invisible had taught her skills she'd never recognized, and about how, for the first time in her life, she was beginning to believe she actually deserved to be seen. She sealed the letter and set it aside for posting. Then she went to find Adrian, who was in his study reviewing estate business. "I want to do something," she said. He looked up. "What?" "The tenant families I've been visiting. They have concerns that haven't been addressed in years. Necessary repairs that keep getting delayed. Children who need education. I want to actually fix those things. Use the estate's resources for something that matters. That will be expensive. We can afford it. It will also be noticed. The other landowners will say we're being soft, setting dangerous precedents. Let them say it." Eliza met his eyes. "I didn't become Duchess to maintain the status quo. I became Duchess to actually make a difference. If that makes me a poor Duchess by their standards, I don't care." Adrian studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled, that rare, genuine expression that transformed his entire face. "Then let's make a difference." And Eliza, standing in the study of Blackthorn Hall with a man who'd chosen her when no one else did, realized something profound. She wasn't trying to become the Duchess everyone expected anymore. She was becoming the Duchess only she could be, and that scared her. But it also, for the first time in her life, felt like exactly where she was supposed to be. The work started immediately. Adrian brought in architects and builders. Eliza met with every tenant family personally, documenting their needs, listening to stories that had gone unheard for decades. Mrs. Daventry, initially horrified by the disruption, eventually became Eliza's unlikely ally when she realized the Duchess wasn't playing at charity. She was serious about systemic change. "The Dawson cottage needs a new roof before winter," Eliza said one morning, reviewing her notes with Crawford. "The Millers have 4 children sharing one bedroom, and the Thompsons' well water has been contaminated for months." Crawford nodded grimly. "All known issues, Your Grace. Previous management deemed them non-urgent." "Non-urgent." Eliza's voice was flat. "People are drinking bad water, and we called it non-urgent. The estate operates on tight margins. The estate operates on the labor of people we're systematically failing." She looked up. "Fix it. All of it. I don't care what it costs." Word spread, not just through the estate, but through Hampshire. The new Duchess of Blackthorn was spending a fortune on tenant welfare. Some called it admirable. Others called it naive. Mrs. Pemberton called it playing at poverty while wearing silk gowns, which Eliza found particularly rich coming from a woman who'd never visited her own tenant farms. But the criticism didn't matter, because for the first time, Eliza was doing something that felt like it actually mattered. 3 months after the ball, she received an unexpected visitor. Caroline arrived at Blackthorn Hall in a carriage that looked shabby next to the estate's vehicles, wearing a dress that had clearly been altered and re-altered to stay fashionable. She stood in the entrance hall looking small and uncomfortable and nothing like the golden daughter Eliza remembered. "Caroline," Eliza said carefully, "this is unexpected." "I know." Her sister's voice was tight. "Can we talk? Privately?" They went to the library. Eliza dismissed the servants and waited. Caroline stood by the window, not looking at her. "I owe you an apology," Caroline said finally. Eliza blinked. "What?" "For how I treated you, before the wedding, during, after." Caroline turned and Eliza saw tears on her face. "I was horrible to you. I said unforgivable things, and I need you to know I'm sorry." "What brought this on?" Lord Ashford proposed to me last week. Eliza's stomach dropped. Lord Ashford was at least 50, widowed twice, and had a reputation for cruelty toward his late wives. Caroline, I said no. Caroline laughed bitterly. Mother was furious, said I was throwing away my last chance, that at 24 I was already past my prime and couldn't afford to be selective. But I looked at him, and all I could think was, this is what I've been working toward my entire life? This is what all that effort was for? She sat down heavily, her perfect posture finally crumbling. You were right, Caroline continued, at the wedding. When you said you weren't winning, just stopping losing. I've spent my whole life trying to win at a game that was designed to destroy me either way. Be beautiful enough to attract a husband, but not so beautiful that you threaten other women. Be accomplished, but not intimidating. Be charming, but not forward. Be everything perfect, and end up with someone like Lord Ashford because that's the best I can actually achieve. Eliza sat beside her sister. What do you want to do? I don't know. That's the terrifying part. I have no skills beyond looking pretty and making conversation. Mother never taught me anything useful because she said I wouldn't need it. I just need to marry well. Caroline wiped her eyes. And now I'm 24 with no prospects except men old enough to be my father, and I don't know how to be anything except the perfect daughter who's failing at the only job she was given. For the first time, Eliza truly understood her sister, not as the enemy or the favorite or the golden daughter, but as another woman trapped in the same impossible system, just in a different cage. Stay here, Eliza said. Caroline looked up, shocked. What? Stay at Blackthorn Hall, not forever, but for a while. Figure out who you are when you're not performing for Mother or society or anyone else. Learn something, do something, become someone beyond the perfect daughter. I can't impose on you like that. You're not imposing, I'm offering. Eliza paused. I know we've never been close. I know you resented me, and I resented you right back. But maybe we could try being sisters instead of competitors. Caroline stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, she nodded. Okay. Yes, thank you. She stayed. And slowly, awkwardly, they began to build something that resembled an actual relationship. Caroline helped with the tenant visits, initially horrified by the conditions, but gradually becoming genuinely invested. She had a talent for organization that Eliza lacked, systematizing the relief efforts into something sustainable. You're good at this, Eliza observed one afternoon. Caroline looked surprised. I've never been good at anything practical before. That's because no one ever let you try. The changes at Blackthorn Hall attracted attention beyond Hampshire. Word reached London that the Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn were implementing radical reforms to their estate management. Some lauded it as progressive. Others condemned it as dangerous precedent. And then Lady Thornbury arrived with news. You've been invited to court, she announced, sweeping into the library where Eliza was reviewing accounts. Eliza looked up. What? The Queen has requested your presence. She's heard about your work with the tenants and wants to meet the Duchess, who's revolutionizing estate management. Lady Thornbury smiled. This is enormous, Eliza. An audience with the Queen could legitimize everything you're doing. Or it could be a trap, a way to publicly shame me for overstepping. Possibly, but you've never let fear of public shame stop you before. She wasn't wrong. The journey to London was surreal. Eliza had only been to the city once before, as a child, and remembered nothing but noise and crowds and feeling overwhelmed. Now she returned as a duchess, with Adrian beside her and Caroline insisting on coming along for moral support. The palace was exactly as intimidating as she'd imagined, all gold and marble, and people who looked at her with barely concealed assessment. Eliza wore her finest gown, her most impressive jewelry, and still felt like a fraud. Stop fidgeting, Adrian murmured as they waited in an antechamber. I'm not fidgeting. You're destroying your gloves. Eliza looked down to find she'd been twisting the fabric without realizing it. She forced her hands to still. What if she hates me? Then she hates you. But at least you'll have tried. That's not comforting. I'm not trying to comfort you. I'm trying to keep you grounded. The Queen received them in a private drawing room, smaller than Eliza expected, but no less intimidating. She was younger than the portrait suggested, maybe 40, with sharp eyes that took in everything. "Your Grace," she said to Adrian, who bowed. Then turning to Eliza, "And you must be the Duchess of Blackthorn I've heard so much about." Eliza curtsied, trying to remember every rule of protocol she'd hastily studied on the journey. "Your Majesty, I'm honored." "I'm sure you are." The Queen gestured for them to sit. "I've been hearing interesting reports from Hampshire, a duchess who visits tenant farms, who spends estate funds on housing repairs and education instead of balls and jewels, who apparently told Mrs. Pemberton that social propriety matters less than human welfare." Eliza's stomach dropped. "Your Majesty, if I've caused offense, you've caused a sensation." The Queen's expression was unreadable. "The question is whether you're a genuine reformer or simply naive." "I'm probably both," Eliza said honestly. "I don't know enough about estate management to know all the traditional reasons why things are done certain ways. So I'm approaching it from a different angle. What actually helps the people who live and work there?" "And your husband supports this?" "Completely," Adrian said. "My wife has accomplished in 4 months what decades of traditional management failed to do. The tenants are healthier, more productive, and actually loyal to the estate instead of resentful. Loyalty built through care rather than fear." The Queen leaned back. "A radical concept in our current system." They talked for an hour, about estate management, about the responsibilities of nobility, about the tension between tradition and progress. The Queen asked pointed questions that revealed she knew far more about Blackthorn's reforms than Eliza had realized. Finally, she stood, signaling the audience was ending. "I'm going to be honest with you, Duchess," she said. "What you're doing is dangerous. Not because it's wrong, but because it challenges every assumption our society is built on. If nobility starts prioritizing tenant welfare over social status, the entire power structure shifts. You've made enemies, powerful ones, people who see your success as a threat to their way of life." "I know, Your Majesty." "And you're going to continue anyway." "Yes." The Queen smiled then, a real smile, not the practiced diplomatic expression. "Good. Because we need more people willing to challenge those assumptions. Just be careful. Change is necessary, but it's also costly. Make sure you're prepared to pay the price." They left the palace in a daze. Caroline was waiting in the carriage, practically vibrating with curiosity. "Well?" "She didn't hate me," Eliza said, still processing. "That's it? That's all you're going to say?" "She also didn't love me, but she respected what we're doing, I think. Maybe. I'm not actually sure what just happened." Adrian was smiling. "You impressed the Queen of England. That's what happened." Word of the royal audience spread faster than Eliza thought possible. Within a week, she received invitations from estates across England, landowners wanting to learn about her methods, skeptics wanting to disprove them, everyone wanting to assess the Duchess, who'd somehow earned royal attention. But the real test came from an unexpected source. Eliza's mother arrived at Blackthorn Hall unannounced, sweeping into the entrance hall like she owned it. "Mother," Eliza said, caught off guard, "I didn't know you were coming." Clearly. Her mother's eyes swept the hall, taking in the changes Eliza had made. The flowers, the warmth, the evidence of life being lived. "We need to talk." They went to Eliza's private sitting room. Her mother sat with her usual rigid posture, but something in her expression was different, uncertain. "I came to tell you that you were right," she said finally. Eliza blinked. "About what?" "About everything. About how I treated you. About the impossible standards I held you to. About measuring your worth against your sisters instead of seeing you for who you actually were." Her mother's voice cracked. "I came to apologize." "Why now?" "Because I watched you transform from the daughter I dismissed into someone I barely recognize. Someone who met the Queen, who's changing how estates are managed across England, who's built a life that matters." She paused. "And I realized that if I'd gotten my way, if you'd stayed invisible and married some minor gentleman and lived quietly, none of that would have happened. The world would have lost something valuable because I was too shallow to see it." Eliza didn't know what to say. She'd imagined this conversation 1,000 times, but never quite like this. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said honestly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking you to know that I was wrong, that I see it now, and that I'm sorry. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to erase 22 years of dismissal and cruelty and being told she didn't matter. But it was something. Okay, Eliza said. Thank you for telling me. Her mother left that afternoon. Eliza stood in the entrance hall watching the carriage disappear and felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness exactly, but closure. The ability to finally let go of the need for her mother's approval because she no longer needed it to know her own worth. The following months brought more changes. The tenant reforms proved so successful that other estates started implementing similar programs. Eliza was invited to speak at gatherings of landowners, sharing what they'd learned. Adrian, watching his wife command rooms full of skeptical aristocrats, realized he'd married someone far more remarkable than even he'd anticipated. But the real transformation happened in quieter moments. Like the afternoon Eliza found Adrian in the library, reading by the fire, and realized she'd fallen in love with him. Not the dramatic, sweeping love of novels, but something quieter and more solid, built on mutual respect and shared purpose, and the comfort of being known. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing her watching him. "That I didn't marry you for love." He set down his book. "I know, but I love you now. That probably should have happened before the wedding, but I'm doing everything backwards anyway." Adrian smiled, that real smile that transformed his face. "I love you too. Have for a while. Was waiting for you to catch up." Arrogant, accurate. She crossed the room and kissed him, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Or the evening Caroline announced she'd been offered a position managing a charity school in London, using the organizational skills she'd discovered she had to help other girls receive the education she'd never gotten. "I'm terrified," Caroline admitted. "I've never done anything like this." "You'll be brilliant," Eliza said, and meant it. Or the morning Eliza woke up and realized she was happy. Not in the frantic, desperate way she'd been happy as a child when someone finally noticed her, but in the quiet, certain way that came from building a life that actually mattered. A year after the wedding, Eliza stood on the same bridge where she'd met Adrian as children. She'd come here deliberately, needing to close that particular circle. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Adrian approaching. "How did you know I was here?" "Where else would you be?" He joined her, looking down at the water. "What are you thinking about?" "About how strange life is. How one choice, to sit with a lonely boy on a bridge, led to all of this." She gestured vaguely at everything their life had become. "I wasn't trying to save you. I was just trying to be kind. Maybe that's what saving people looks like. Not grand gestures, just someone caring when no one else does." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the water flow beneath them. "I got a letter from Lady Thornberry," Eliza said eventually. "She wants me to help organize a conference on estate reform. Bring together landowners who are interested in implementing similar programs." "Are you going to do it?" "I think so. It feels important, like we might actually be able to change things on a larger scale." "We? You're coming with me, obviously." Adrian laughed. "Obviously." As they walked back toward their waiting carriage, Eliza thought about the girl she'd been, invisible, forgotten, convinced she didn't deserve to be seen, and the woman she'd become, still flawed, still uncertain sometimes, but no longer apologizing for existing. She'd spent 22 years learning to survive by being invisible. She'd spent the last year learning to thrive by being seen, and she was done hiding. 6 months later, the conference took place in London. Over 100 landowners attended, some genuinely interested in reform, others skeptically waiting to find fault. Eliza stood before them, this room full of powerful men and a handful of women who'd inherited estates by accident of birth, and felt the familiar flutter of panic. Then she remembered the bridge, the boy who was ready to jump, the choice to stay. And she spoke. Not about theories or abstract concepts, but about actual people. The Dawson family whose children were healthier now that their cottage had a proper roof. The Miller children who were learning to read because the estate had funded a school. The Thompsons who no longer had contaminated water. "This isn't about charity," she said. It's about recognizing that the people who work our estates are human beings with dignity and worth, that their well-being isn't separate from our success. It's fundamental to it. We can continue operating the way we always have, treating tenants as resources to be extracted from. Or we can try something different, something that actually honors the responsibility we claim to take so seriously. The room was silent when she finished. Then someone in the back started clapping. Others joined. Not everyone. There were still skeptics, still people who thought she was naive or dangerous, or both. But enough. Later, as guests mingled over refreshments, Lady Thornberry found her. "That was extraordinary," she said. "It was terrifying." "Those aren't mutually exclusive." Lady Thornberry paused. "You've changed the conversation, Eliza, not just about estate management, but about what nobility means, what responsibility actually looks like. That's no small thing. It's also exhausting. All worthwhile things are." That night, back at their London residence, Eliza collapsed onto a sofa beside Adrian. "I think I just committed us to a lifetime of fighting uphill battles," she said. "Probably. You're not concerned?" "I married a woman who told Mrs. Pemberton that social propriety mattered less than human welfare. I knew what I was getting into." "Did you, though?" Adrian pulled her closer. "I knew you were brave. I knew you cared about things that mattered. I knew you wouldn't be content maintaining the status quo." He paused. "I didn't know you'd be quite this effective at dismantling it, but I'm not complaining." They sat in comfortable silence, and Eliza felt the weight of the day settling into something manageable. She'd stood in front of England's elite and demanded they do better. Some had listened, some hadn't, but she'd tried, and she'd do it again tomorrow. The years that followed weren't easy. The reforms at Blackthorn and other estates faced constant pushback from traditionalists who saw change as threat. Eliza and Adrian fought battles in Parliament, in society drawing rooms, in the court of public opinion. They made enemies. They made mistakes. They failed sometimes. But they also succeeded. Tenant living conditions improved across dozens of estates. Education programs spread. The conversation about aristocratic responsibility shifted from theoretical obligation to practical application. And Eliza, the forgotten daughter who'd learned to survive by being invisible, became known across England as the Duchess who refused to look away from inconvenient truths. 5 years after that first dance in Hampshire, Eliza stood in the Great Hall of Blackthorn, watching Caroline organize a charity event with the same intensity she'd once applied to landing a husband. Mrs. Daventry had stopped fighting Eliza's changes and started suggesting her own. The estate thrived. Adrian found her there, watching the organized chaos with amusement. "Thinking about how far we've come?" he asked. "Thinking about how far we still have to go." "Always forward with you, isn't it? Would you want it any other way?" "Absolutely not." Eliza leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth that had become as familiar as breathing. They'd built something here, not the perfect fairy tale everyone expected, but something real, something that mattered. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Choosing me that night in the ballroom? Starting all of this?" Adrian was quiet for a moment, considering. "Never," he said finally. "You saved my life twice, Eliza, once on a bridge when we were children, once when you married me and made this house feel less like a mausoleum and more like a home. How could I regret that?" "I'm difficult." "You're impossible. I knew that going in. I've made us enemies. You've made us matter. There's a difference." That night, Eliza wrote in the journal she'd started keeping after the wedding, a record of their work, their struggles, their small victories and devastating setbacks. Someday, she thought, someone might read this and understand what it cost to change things, what it meant to choose to be seen when invisibility was safer. She wrote about the girl she'd been, standing against a wall at a ball, convinced she was watching a cruel joke unfold, about the woman she'd become, standing in rooms full of powerful people and demanding they do better, about the journey between those two moments, painful and frightening and absolutely worth it. And she wrote about hope, not the naive hope that everything would be easy or that change would come without cost, but the stubborn, resilient hope that said trying mattered, that one person choosing to care could ripple outward into something larger, that being seen, really seen as a whole flawed human being, was worth the terrifying vulnerability it required. The forgotten daughter had become a duchess. The invisible girl had become a force for change. The woman who'd learned not to want anything had built a life defined by purpose. It wasn't the fairy tale society expected. It was better. It was real. And years later, when Eliza stood in that same ballroom where it all began, now hosting a gathering of landowners committed to estate reform, she remembered the girl who'd stood against the wall, watching her sisters shine while she learned to disappear. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who'd learned that true power didn't come from being chosen by others. It came from choosing yourself, from deciding you mattered regardless of whether anyone else agreed, from being brave enough to be seen, even when visibility meant vulnerability. The dance that had started with a duke crossing a ballroom to claim an invisible girl had transformed into something neither of them could have imagined. Not just a marriage, but a partnership. Not just a title, but a purpose. Not just survival, but a legacy. And Eliza, watching the room full of people who were there because she'd refused to stay invisible, finally understood what Adrian had known all along. She wasn't remarkable because a duke had chosen her. She was remarkable because she'd chosen to believe she deserved to be chosen. And then she'd proven it, not by becoming perfect or by fitting into society's expectations, but by being so completely, stubbornly, courageously herself that the world had no choice but to make room for her. The overlooked girl had become impossible to ignore. And she was just getting started.